There is a version of you that wakes up every morning and immediately reaches for a phone. Not because it needs to, because the first thing it does, before the body is even fully awake, is check. Am I still here? Does anyone know I exist? Did anything change while I was gone? That version of you has a name. Psychologists call it the ego. And in 2026, it has been given the most sophisticated set of tools in human history to do what it was always trying to do: build a fortress out of perception. Here is what most people get wrong about the ego. They treat it like a villain, like some corrupted part of the self that needs to be executed. Meditation app open, deep breath, ego death incoming. But that framing misses something important. The ego was never evil. It was architecture. Think about what happens to a child who learns early and clearly that love is conditional, that affection arrives when you perform well and disappears when you do not. That child doesn't become broken. It becomes strategic. It builds a self that is designed to be lovable, to be acceptable, to survive the room it grew up in. The ego is that child's first masterwork, a structure assembled from the feedback of everyone who ever had power over you. It is a survival mechanism wearing the face of a personality, and for a while, it works. The problem is the world it was built for no longer exists. You are not a child anymore. The people whose approval you were optimizing for, some of them are gone. Some of them changed. Some of them were never worth the architecture you built to please them. But the structure remains. And now it has found new rooms to haunt. Curated profiles, follower counts, the quiet, devastating question that pulses under every post you have ever uploaded. Is this enough? Am I enough? In 2026, the digital infrastructure of the world has become the most precise ego-feeding machine ever constructed. It does not merely allow you to perform a self. It rewards the performance. Algorithmically, continuously. It has turned the ancient human hunger for recognition into a feedback loop that never, ever closes. And so the ego, which was already a cage, has become a city, complete with walls and mirrors and very little sky. The result is a particular kind of emptiness that cannot be explained by the circumstances of your life. Because by every external measure, things might be fine. You might have the markers, the relationship, the career, the following, the reputation, and still, underneath it, something sits like a stone in still water, heavy, unmoving, insisting. That heaviness is not depression. It is the weight of a self you did not choose, pressing down on one you have never met. 2. The illusion of the Gnostic mirror. There is an old story, older than psychology, older than most of the philosophies we have inherited, about what happens when a being mistakes its reflection for its origin. The ancient Gnostics told it this way: Sophia, which means wisdom, looked down into the void and saw her own light reflected back at her, and instead of recognizing it as a reflection, she reached for it. From that grasping, that fundamental confusion of image and source, an entire distorted world was born. I want you to sit with that image for a moment before we do anything with it, because if you strip away the cosmology, what it describes is something terrifyingly familiar. You look into the world, into the reactions of other people, into your achievements, into the filtered images you produce of yourself, and you see something looking back, and you call that something me. But it is not you. It is your reflection. Think about the last time someone criticized you. Not constructively. I mean the kind that lands somewhere soft and specific and takes longer to leave than it should. What did that feel like? Where did it land? Now, think about the last time someone praised you in exactly the way you needed to hear. Where did that land? Same place, isn't it? That place is the ego, and the ego has made a terrible agreement with the external world. Your sense of self will be determined by what the world reflects back at you. You become, in the most literal sense, dependent on the mirror. And this is where it gets genuinely strange. Because most of us are not just looking into one mirror. We are surrounded by hundreds of them. Every person in your life is showing you a different version of yourself. Your mother's version, your partner's version, your colleague's version, the version that exists in the minds of people who have never even met you, based on 47 seconds of content you posted at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. And you, the real you, whatever that is, stands at the center of all these reflections, trying to reconcile them into something coherent, trying to be the version your mother needs, while also being the version your audience expects, while also being the version that feels vaguely true when you are alone at 3 in the morning and the performance has temporarily stopped. That is not living. That is load-bearing. The exhaustion you feel, and I want to be precise about this, is not the exhaustion of doing too much. It is the exhaustion of maintaining structural integrity under the weight of a self that is fundamentally not yours. You are holding up walls that were built by other people's needs and calling the effort identity. The mirror does not show you who you are. The mirror shows you who the room requires you to be. 3. The stolen light within. But here is what the Gnostics understood that most psychologies quietly sidestep. There is something in you that predates all of this. Before the first time you were told you were too much or not enough. Before you learned which version of yourself was safe to bring into the room. Before the performance began, there was something, a pre-reflective awareness, a consciousness that existed before it was given a name, a role, a social security number, an aesthetic. The Gnostics called it the pneuma, the divine spark, and they had a very specific and unsettling claim about its relationship to the ego. The ego does not merely obscure the spark, it feeds on it. Think about the energy you pour into maintaining your narrative, the mental bandwidth spent rehearsing conversations, curating appearances, managing how you are perceived, nursing grievances that validate your story about yourself. That energy has to come from somewhere. It comes from you, from the deepest part of you, and the ego takes it and builds cathedrals to its own importance out of it. You know this is true because you have felt the calling, that quiet, persistent signal that arrives in the spaces between performances, in the pause after a conversation ends, and before you pick up your phone, in the moment just before sleep, when the day stops requiring things of you. A voice that is not quite a voice, a pressure that is not quite pain. It does not speak in sentences, but if it did, it might say something like, "This is not it. You are not this. There is something else. There has always been something else." Most people experience this signal as existential anxiety, as restlessness, as the inexplicable sense that despite doing everything right, something is deeply, irrevocably wrong. The ego, to its credit, is very good at managing this. It reframes the signal as a problem to be solved. More achievement, better relationships, a different city, a new philosophy, anything, except sitting quietly in the presence of what is actually asking to be heard. Because what is asking to be heard is not another project. It is not another identity. It is the part of you that does not need any of it. And the ego, which is nothing without constant maintenance, without the drama, without the story of your unique and important suffering, cannot survive that recognition. 4. Shattering the psychological construct. I am not going to tell you that the way through this is easy. I am not going to give you a list, because the work of unmasking does not begin with a technique. It begins with a recognition, and that recognition is uncomfortable in a way that is very specific. The ego reveals itself most clearly, not in its proudest moments, but in its most defensive ones. The disproportionate sting of a criticism that should have rolled off. The rage at being misunderstood by someone whose opinion, if you are honest, does not actually matter to you. The performance you put on for a stranger you will never see again. The compulsion to explain yourself when no explanation was required. These are not character flaws. These are the edges of the architecture, the places where the structure strains under conditions it was not built for. And if you can learn to notice them without immediately justifying them, you have found the beginning of something real. What follows is not pleasant. When you stop performing, when you genuinely stop, even for a short time, there is a void, and the void is not peaceful. It is disconcerting in a way that most people flee immediately, reaching for the nearest distraction, which is conveniently always available and always waiting. The void feels like nothing, and for a self that has been defined by the constant production of something, nothing is terrifying. But here is the thing about the void. It is not empty because you have lost something. It is empty because you have briefly stopped adding things. The Gnostics called the created world the world made of reflections and distortions, and the hunger of lesser gods, the Kanoma, the emptiness. And they were not wrong about what it feels like to live inside it. But they were very specific about what the emptiness was made of. It was made of the absence of the divine, of something real that had been displaced by something that merely looked real. So when you stop performing and the void appears, what you are experiencing is not the absence of yourself. You are experiencing, possibly for the first time in a long time, the absence of the false self. And that is a completely different thing. The practical edge of this. Begin to distinguish the voice of the ego from the quality of silence underneath it. The ego speaks in narratives. It tells stories about what things mean, about what you deserve, about what other people think, about how this all fits into the arc of your important and embattled life. The silence does not narrate. It observes. It is present without commentary. Learn to find that silence, even briefly, not as a destination, as a reference point, a way of orienting yourself when the noise gets loud enough that you can no longer tell which direction is real. 5. Reclaiming the sovereign self. None of this is an argument for becoming nobody. This is not a video that ends with the dissolving of self into undifferentiated bliss. That framing has its own problems and its own convenient escape from the actual difficulty of living as a person in a world that continues to require things of you. What integration actually looks like. And this is what the Gnostics pointed toward when they spoke of the pleroma, the fullness, the condition of being whole rather than fragmented, is not the death of the ego. It is the reassignment of the ego. The ego was always a tool. The problem was never its existence. The problem was that somewhere along the way, the tool started running the workshop. It started making decisions about what mattered, what was worth feeling, which parts of yourself were acceptable to express, and which needed to stay locked in a room, where no one could see them, the sovereign self, the self that has done the work of recognizing the architecture, does not abandon the ego. It uses it deliberately, with awareness, the way you would use any specialized instrument, for the tasks it is actually suited for, and not for the tasks that require something deeper. And something changes when you reach that point. The mirrors stop being threatening. This is the most tangible sign I can offer you that the work is happening. When someone withholds their approval and the ground does not shift. When someone offers their criticism and you can evaluate it without performing either defensive collapse or defensive dismissal. When you look at the reflection the world is offering you and you can say, that is interesting, that is useful information, that is something to consider, without your sense of self being held hostage to the answer. You stop needing the mirror because you have found the light source. The divine spark, whatever name you want to give it, in whatever frame feels honest to you, is not a metaphor for positivity. It is not a metaphor for self-esteem. It is the recognition that at the center of your experience, before the story and beneath the noise, there is a quality of awareness that was never built by the world and cannot be destroyed by it. You did not earn it. You cannot lose it. You can only forget that it is there, buried under the weight of a self that was constructed for a room you no longer live in. The modern world, with all of its extraordinary and specifically calibrated ability to keep you performing, comparing, optimizing, and measuring, is not going to remind you of this. It has no interest in your wholeness. Wholeness does not convert. That is why the recognition has to come from the inside. And it will, not because you meditated correctly, or read the right thing, or arrived at the right framework, but because the spark, the thing underneath all the architecture, is not passive. It is not waiting to be discovered. It is actively, continuously asking to be seen. You have already felt it. That quiet insistence, that pressure behind the sternum when the performance gets too heavy. That moment of inexplicable recognition when something reaches through the noise and touches something in you that has no name. That is not anxiety. That is not nostalgia. That is not a symptom. That is the part of you that has been trying to get your attention for a very long time. The question, the only question that this video is really asking, is whether you are finally ready to listen.